Hey there. If you click this video, I'm sure this scene's a little familiar to you. Or maybe your memory looks a little like this. And I'm not talking about the docks at Karamja fishing for lobsters. I'm talking about RuneScape, the game that was never supposed to survive this long. It started as a scuffed browser MMO from our childhood that got memed to death in school computer labs, and somehow grew into one of the most iconic games of all time. But along the way, something strange happened. The game fractured, not just in gameplay style, but philosophy, in community, in soul. Today, RuneScape exists in two separate timelines. RuneScape 3, a Frankenstein monster of modern MMO mechanics and microtransactions, and old school RuneScape, a nostalgic revival of the game we all cherished from our childhood, powered solely by fan demand. I like to look at the story of how RuneScape got so big and ultimately fractured, accidentally creating its own competitor. The story of innovation, betrayal, and an MMO that refused to die. Let's go back in time to 2001. RuneScape Classic, a browser-based MMO coded by two British brothers in a language that barely worked at the time. It looked like a medieval Lego fever dream, and we loved it as kids. It was simple. You see, this was a time in the internet where we didn't have fancy graphics-based games, and this was playable in your browser. There was no download, no payment off the bat. It was incredible. Then in 2004, as time evolved, RuneScape 2 came out, cleaned up the image and the playstyle of this game. New graphics, better combat, smoother skilling, and this kicked off the game's golden age, an era where the players shaped everything. A time that you probably remember, and a time that I definitely remember the most. Whether you were killing cows in Lumbridge, cooking lobsters in Karamja, or getting lured for your bank in the wilderness, RuneScape felt alive. The grind was brutal. Progress was slow, but that's what made it matter. That's what made it worth it. There were no XP boosts, no paid skips, no fast lanes for this experience. The core appeal of RuneScape wasn't about reaching the max level. It was about how you got there and the story you made along the way. This is what set RuneScape apart from every other game and MMO at that time. Other MMOs had epic storylines and flashy gear, but RuneScape gave you 1 XP at a time for thousands of hours, and we loved it as kids. The accessibility is really what skyrocketed this game into being played by millions of people over the years. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was honest. It respected your time and respected the grind, and people trusted it, and it had a good run until about the year 2012. You see, in early 2012, RuneScape started to show its cracks, not in the gameplay, but in game design and philosophy. It changed because for the first time in this game's history, you could pay for progress. You see, around this time, Jagex introduced the Squeal of Fortune. It was framed as a fun daily spin, a light addition to the game. Nothing big off the bat, but almost immediately they added an option to buy an additional spin with real money. And with these spins came coins, XP, and high tier items. This wasn't just controversial for the base. It cut at the heart of what RuneScape was about. RuneScape's entire identity, its core loot, was built around time and the time you put into your account. The grind wasn't a side effect or a side quest, it was the point of the game. Getting 99 in a skill wasn't just about efficiency, it was about endurance. This wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. Every achievement was earned. Everything in this game had meaning behind it, time put in. So when Jagex started selling XP and gold for real world money, even indirectly in some senses, it broke that contract. It told players, your time doesn't matter as much as someone else's wallet. Anyone can spend the money and leapfrog your effort put in. And in a game where thousands of your hours held value, to the player, this felt like a betrayal. The backlash was immediate. Forum posts hit thousands of replies. Players organized in-game protests. And still, Jagex pushed forward. They gave the corporate response that it was necessary to fund future adventures for this game and company. And maybe at the time, it was. But the moment they made progression in this game a purchasable commodity, something intangible broke. And that couldn't be unbroken. From that point on, RuneScape was no longer about the grind. It started to become a store. Then came the second shift, and this one was even bigger. In November of 2012, that same year, Jagex released the Evolution of Combat update, which would reshape the face of this game. This wasn't just a tweak. It was a full rewrite of RuneScape's combat system. Out went the old turn-based tick mechanic that we grew up with and loved. In came ability bars, adrenaline meters, cooldowns, ultimates, and full MMO rotations. On paper, it looked impressive, complex, and action-oriented, ambitious, but it also looked oddly familiar. Because what Jagex was doing in this moment was chasing a trend, specifically World of Warcraft and other MMOs at that time. These games had exploded in popularity with reactive, action-based combat systems, and RuneScape wanted to compete in that same space. And to do that, they fundamentally changed what RuneScape was. The big problem was RuneScape was ever trying to be those games. It was never about flashy rotations or optimized DPS. This game was simple, and EOC just didn't fit within the ecosystem of what people loved with this game. See, RuneScape was about so much more than just a rotation bar. EOC replaced something technical, but also something personal to the experience. PvP all but died overnight. The skill ceiling moved, not higher or lower, just sideways. And longtime players who had put hours into this game suddenly found themselves in a world that felt unfamiliar. Worse, there was no alternative at this time. You couldn't opt out of this system. You either adapted or you quit, and a lot of people quit. And for those who stayed, it was really hard to shake the feeling that this game wasn't evolving. It was chasing ideas that didn't fit within its space, trying to be something else, something it never needed to be. A year later in 2013, after a good amount of updates, Jagex reintroduced the game as RuneScape 3, the third evolution of this ever-evolving MMO, and on the surface, it was a new beginning for the game. They upgraded the engine, gave the UI a complete overhaul, added voice dialogue, fully orchestrated music. Technically, on paper, it was the most ambitious RuneScape has ever been, but under the hood, something was missing. The game became more polished, but also more confused. It wasn't clear who RuneScape 3 was for anymore. On one hand, it had deep boss mechanics, heavy lore, and some genuinely great updates. But on the other hand, it leaned heavily into paid promotions, microtransactions, new cosmetics, limited time items, XP boosted events. The core experience that used to define RuneScape, slow progression, open-ended goals, and the freedom to play the way you wanted, was getting buried under a pile of distractions. There was still a core audience that loved the direction of RuneScape 3 for its complexity and systems. But for most people, it just didn't feel like RuneScape anymore. And the player count reflected this. It felt like a version of the game that was trying to be everything at once. Modern MMO, casual skiller sandbox, story-driven RPG, live service event machine. And in that, it lost what it truly was. Its own entity. And while Jagex continued to push this game forward, a growing portion of the community started to look backwards. And while RuneScape 3 was evolving into something new, a very different version of this game was beginning to come back to life. Because in early 2013, Jagex put out a simple poll. Would players want to revive a backup version of this game from the 2007 era? No evolution of combat, no microtransactions, no rebrand, just classic RuneScape. Exactly how it was before everything changed. And hundreds of thousands of players said yes. And this version became what we know today as old school RuneScape. And at its launch, it was bare bones, exactly what we had in 2007. No grand exchange, no quality of life tools, just a slightly buggy version of the game that people remembered from middle school. But that was the appeal. There were no distractions, no key promotions, or flashy menus. Just the grind. Exactly how it used to be. A fresh start for everyone. But old school RuneScape didn't stay frozen in time. Over the years, it quietly grew. It got the grand exchange, clue scroll updates, minigame fixes. Then came bigger things, bosses, raids, and full expansions built from scratch by a dedicated dev team. They were building this new content with the old values. And everything had to pass a community poll. Updates needed a 75% approval rating from the community to be introduced to the game. That meant players actually trusted what came next because they voted for it. And it wasn't just the game that grew, but the community grew and came back even stronger. YouTubers started to build careers around it. Streamers hosted high-stake events. They inspired new game modes like Iron Man and Hardcore Iron Man. That added new ways to play and experience the game. And in 2018, RuneScape came to your phone with the launch of OSRS Mobile, bringing millions of new players into the space that didn't experience it on PC at the time. Old school RuneScape became more than just a throwback or a memory. It became the main version of RuneScape for an entire new generation. And not because it was stuck in the past, just built with the ideals of the past. And today, RuneScape exists in two timelines. RuneScape 3 is still up and running. It has its own loyal fan base, deep PVM mechanics, and then regular story updates. And just as regularly, a new batch of microtransactions and XP boosts. And recently, Jagex put out a video acknowledging how much the microtransactions have hurt this branch of the game. It's a functioning MMO with years of content, but it's not the face of the franchise anymore. That title's held by old school RuneScape. And OSRS didn't just succeed, it proved something to the entire gaming industry. That players don't always want innovation just for the sake of innovation. Sometimes they want stability, familiarity, a game that knows what it is and is comfortable in itself. It showed depth doesn't have to come from complexity, that value doesn't have to be monetized, and trust matters more than graphics. And people noticed. A few years later, Blizzard would launch classic World of Warcraft, a near carbon copy of its original 2004 game. Other games followed with Diablo 2 Resurrected, EverQuest TLP servers, and even private server communities grew stronger. Old School RuneScape helped prove that there's an audience that doesn't forget their identity, and that sometimes the best way to move forward is to take a step back. RuneScape 3 didn't fail because it changed. It failed because it forgot why people loved RuneScape in the first place. It wasn't about abilities, cosmetics, loot keys. It was about the journey. The grind, the world that felt alive by the players around you. Not because it was detailed or fancy Unreal 5 graphics, because you wanted to be a part of it. And RuneScape lives on today, just not in the way Jagex originally expected. I want to thank y'all as always for tuning in and listening to me ramble a little bit. RuneScape's been a part of my life for the past 20 years and is a game that I think so many other games could learn from. And I want to hear from you below. Did you play RuneScape when you were young? Are you still playing RuneScape? Or maybe you discovered it later in life. Maybe you love RuneScape 3. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And here's 2 more videos that YouTube thinks you might find interesting if you like my stuff. I hope y'all have a good day and always appreciate a like and subscribe down below. I gotta get back to fishing lobsters.